They didn't lose you in the argument. They lost you the first time they pulled away, and you stayed anyway. What an avoidant doesn't understand about a deep empath isn't a mystery. It is a mechanism, a specific, documented, and ultimately irreversible mechanism. And the reason so many avoidants never understand it, even in retrospect, even years later, is because it operates beneath the surface they were taught to watch. The avoidance entire strategy is built on a premise. That emotional distance creates safety, that if you don't let anyone fully in, nothing can fully hurt you. And for a long time, this strategy works. Just until the person on the other side of it is someone who can feel what you're hiding, not what you're saying, not what you're showing, what you are hiding. The empath's silence looks like patience. The avoidant reads it as security. They think, this person understands me. They think, this person won't push. They think, this person will stay. And they are right for a while. But they are wrong about the nature of the staying. They think the empath stays because the empath needs them. What they don't understand is that the empath is staying because the empath is watching. And what the empath is watching accumulates. Every withdrawal, every dismissal, every moment of emotional flatness where warmth should have been. Every time you disappeared without explanation and returned without acknowledgement. The empath filed all of it, not with anger, with precision. And when the empath is done, when the filing is complete, they don't leave in fury. They leave in clarity. And clarity in an empath, is the one thing that doesn't reverse. Before you can understand why that departure is so devastating for the avoidant, why they describe it as coming from nowhere, why they say they never saw it coming, why some of them spend years trying to trace back exactly where it started, you need to understand what was actually happening while they thought they were safely in control. You need to understand what a deep empath actually is. Not the popular version. Not the version that describes empaths as people who feel too much and forgive too easily. That version was written for people who don't understand the mechanism. The actual version is more precise and considerably more consequential. Research on high sensitivity and emotional processing does not describe a soft target. It describes a person whose nervous system is calibrated to receive and process information at a depth that most people simply don't access. The anterior insula, the region involved in both interoceptive awareness and the experience of others' emotional states, shows measurably heightened activation in highly sensitive individuals. What this produces is not just deeper feeling. It produces deeper reading. Here is the thing about avoidance that almost every popular account gets completely wrong. They are not cold. They are not emotionally absent. They are not, in any neurological or documented sense, people who feel less. Research on avoidant attachment, the pattern identified first through Bowlby's foundational work, and later operationalized in adult relationship, studies by Hazan and Shaver, doesn't describe a person with a suppressed emotional capacity. It describes a person with a highly efficient emotional suppression system. That is a different thing entirely. The avoidant doesn't not feel. The avoidant feels, and then the signal is rerouted before it reaches conscious processing at a level that would demand response. Mickelinser and Shaver's research on attachment and emotion regulation documents this precisely. Avoidants show the same physiological arousal as other individuals during relational stress. The heart rate elevates, the cortisol rises, the body responds. But the cognitive architecture built around the experience learns, very early, to override the signal, to contain it, to convince the conscious mind that no signal arrived. They believe this works. They believe, sincerely, that what they present is what they are. A deep empath reads underneath the presentation, not because they are trying to, not because they have made a decision to look past the surface, but because their perceptual system doesn't stop at the surface. The mirror neuron system, the network responsible for vicarious emotional experience, is not a voluntary mechanism. It runs continuously, and in a highly sensitive person, it runs deep. What this means in practice is specific. The avoidant believes they are presenting calm. What the empath receives is the suppressed storm beneath the calm, the tension in the jaw, the micro-withdrawal in the body when emotional closeness approaches, the split-second softness in the eyes that disappears before the avoidant allows themselves to know it was there. The avoidant pulls away and feels nothing, or tells themselves they feel nothing. The empath feels the pull. And here is where the dynamic becomes something the avoidant is completely unprepared for. The empath doesn't just feel what the avoidant is showing. The empath feels what the avoidant is suppressing, and they feel it without being told, without any verbal confirmation. They feel the loneliness that the avoidant's independence is designed to mask. They feel the need for connection that the avoidant's self-sufficiency is covering. And early in the relationship, very early, this creates something in the empath that looks, from the outside, like unconditional patience. It isn't unconditional. It is interested. The empath is not staying because they don't see what's happening. The empath is staying because they see what's underneath what's happening, and they are giving the situation the space to resolve itself. They are watching whether the person inside the defense will choose to become visible over time. That is not the same as forgiving. That is not the same as accepting. And this is the first thing the avoidant fundamentally misunderstands. They think they are with someone who is comfortable with distance. They are with someone who is observing distance and building a very complete picture of what it means. Let's be specific about what this looks like inside the actual relationship. The avoidant moves through the relationship on a pattern that feels to them like balance. They engage when they're comfortable. They withdraw when intimacy gets too close. They return when the emotional pressure subsides. And they have almost always done this before with other people in other relationships, and it has worked. The other person waited. The other person adjusted. The other person reduced their expectations until the relationship settled into a distance the avoidant could tolerate. What the avoidant doesn't account for is the quality of the attention they are receiving from this particular person. The empath is not adjusting. The empath is watching. Every time the avoidant goes quiet for 3 days and returns as if nothing happened, the empath notes it. Every time the avoidant deflects an emotional conversation with sarcasm, with a topic change, with sudden unavailability, the empath notes it. Every time the avoidant is physically present and emotionally elsewhere, the empath feels the gap. Every time the empath reaches for genuine connection and finds the door closed, not slammed, just quietly, politely, firmly closed, the empath registers the architecture of what they are inside. And here is the thing about that filing system. It doesn't operate like anger. Anger would be visible. Anger would give the avoidant information they could respond to. What the empath's observation system produces instead is something much quieter and much more permanent. It produces understanding. The empath understands slowly, then all at once, what this relationship actually is. They understand the ceiling above it. They understand the wall around it. They understand that they are in a space that was designed not consciously but architecturally to be contained. And they understand that the avoidant is not going to dismantle that containment. Not because they don't have warmth to give, but because giving it fully feels to them like falling. Think about what it means to be the person who can feel that fall being avoided. Who can sense the exact moment when the avoidant gets close enough to let something real happen and then feels them choose the distance? Again and again. That is not something you forget. That is something you file. The empath's patience, the quality that makes the avoidant believe they are safe, that the relationship is stable, that no real reckoning is coming, is not infinite. It has a threshold, and the threshold is not crossed by a single dramatic event. It is crossed by accumulation. Research on emotional processing in highly sensitive individuals shows a consistent pattern. Their capacity for absorption is high, and their capacity for long-term tolerance of chronic emotional invalidation is ultimately much lower than it appears from the outside. What looks like resilience to the avoidant is a very long process of filing and evaluation. The empath is not absorbing indefinitely. They are deciding, and the decision, when it arrives, is not the result of the last argument or the last dismissal. The decision was already being made, had been being made for months, sometimes for years. The last event is not the cause. It is simply the last data point. The avoidant misses this, just because they have never paid the quality of attention to the empath that the empath has been paying to them. They project their own perceptual style. They assume the relationship is being experienced at the level they are capable of experiencing it. They didn't know they were with someone operating at a different resolution entirely. So when the empath starts going a little quieter, when they become a little more distant, offer a little less of the warmth the avoidant had, by this point, structure their emotional baseline around. The avoidant doesn't recognize it for what it is. They think it's a phase. They wait for it to pass. It doesn't pass. And there is one more thing the avoidant doesn't understand here. One specific mechanism that changes everything about what happens next. To see it, you need to understand what emotional suppression actually does. Not how it appears to work, but what it does inside the body of the person practicing it. Emotional suppression is not the absence of emotion. That distinction matters enormously here. James Gross's research on emotion regulation documents a consistent finding. When people suppress an emotional expression, the physiological response does not decrease. In multiple studies, suppression actually increased physiological arousal while reducing visible behavioral expression. The body is reacting. The mind is not allowing the reaction to surface. The avoidant is not calm during emotional exchanges. The avoidant is suppressing while during calm. And the body's response, the elevated tension, the contained energy of something that wants to move but isn't permitted to, is not invisible. Not to someone whose nervous system is calibrated to receive it. The empath is not interpreting the avoidance words and concluding there is hidden emotion. The empath is receiving the signal directly, through posture, through the micro-tensions the avoidant's conscious mind is not aware of produce, through the timing of everything that isn't said. The empath knows what is happening in the room before either person has spoken. And here is the moment that changes everything. At some point, usually gradually, sometimes suddenly, the empath understands something they had been sensing for a long time without yet having the words for. They understand that the avoidant is not protected from feeling by their distance. The avoidant is protected from acknowledging that they feel. And those are entirely different things. The empath is not with someone who can't connect. They are with someone who is actively preventing connection while simultaneously drawing on the empath's warmth for regulation. That is a specific thing. It has a specific character in the literature on attachment dynamics. Using another person as an emotional regulator without reciprocating the vulnerability that genuine regulation requires. The avoidant takes in the empath's warmth, their patience, their attunement, their willingness to sit with difficulty as a source of stability. And they give back distance because distance is what feels manageable to them. For a while, the empath gives this because they can feel what's beneath it. They can feel the loneliness. They can feel the defended need. And for a while, feeling it is enough to keep them present. But something shifts. It shifts when the empath understands that the avoidant is not progressing, that they are not using the safety the empath provides to gradually come closer, to trust more, to let the defense become unnecessary. They are using the safety the empath provides to maintain the distance. The empath's presence has become part of the avoidance regulatory system, a resource for stability that doesn't require the avoidant to offer anything comparable in return. This is the moment the empath stops waiting for something to change. They don't announce this. They don't argue about it. They don't issue an ultimatum. The empath's processing at this point is moved somewhere the avoidant has no access to because the avoidant was never invited there. And the decision, the real decision, not the visible one, has already been made in that interior space. What the avoidant sees is a person who is gradually becoming quieter, slightly less available, less warm in ways that are difficult to name, less quick to reach out. The avoidant waits for the weather to clear. And when it doesn't clear, when the empath's new distance starts to feel structural rather than temporary, the avoidant experiences something they have spent their entire adult life designing their relationships to avoid. They feel the loss, not the fear of loss, though that is there too. The actual sensation of losing something they had come to depend on. And this is where the second deeper misunderstanding reveals itself entirely. The avoidant believed they were the one who held the dynamic. They were the one who gave or withheld connection. They were the one who managed the emotional temperature. They were the one who could leave or stay. They understood themselves to be the one with less at stake. What they did not understand is that the empath was the one providing the foundation the entire time. The empath's warmth, their patience, their willingness to keep showing up, these were the materials the avoidant was building their stability on. And when the empath begins to withdraw those materials, the structure shows its actual nature. It wasn't independence. It was borrowed grounding. The avoidant who thought they needed no one discovers just in the specific and disorienting experience of the empath's withdrawal that they needed this person in ways they never acknowledged, never named, never allowed themselves to see. And the feeling of that discovery is not clean. It is not simple recognition of loss. It is the discovery that the protection they built around themselves was so effective that it prevented them from knowing what they were losing while they still had it. Now watch what happens. The avoidant, sensing the empath's withdrawal for the first time, does something that surprises almost everyone who observes it from the outside. They pursue. The person who made distance their entire relational strategy suddenly begins reaching out more, checking in, trying to reinitiate the warmth that has started to recede. And to anyone watching, this looks like a breakthrough. The avoidant is finally opening up, finally trying, finally choosing connection. But look at the timing. The pursuit begins not because the avoidant has changed. The pursuit begins because the empath withdrew. The avoidance attachment system, which had been in permanent deactivation mode throughout the relationship, activates at the moment of perceived loss. And what activates it is not love, exactly. What activates it is the threat to their regulatory source. The empath recognizes this. They recognize it because they have been reading this person's emotions for the entire length of the relationship. They know what genuine warmth from this person feels like, or rather, they know what it doesn't feel like because Genuine warmth never arrived unprompted. It arrived in response to distance. It arrived when the avoidant was afraid. And the empath understands that the fear and the pursuit are real, but they are not evidence of transformation. They are evidence of the very dynamic the empath has already decided they cannot continue to be inside. Think about what this feels like from the inside of that experience. You spent months, sometimes years, being the person who reached across the distance. You understood things about this person they never said aloud. You felt their fear and chose to stay anyway. So you watched yourself give warmth that was absorbed but not reflected. You watched yourself become quieter as you understood more completely what the ceiling of this relationship actually was. And now, in the exact moment when you have finally stopped reaching, they have started. The avoidant is pursuing the person who was already gone. Mikulincer and Shaver's research on attachment dynamics documents this pattern with consistency. The avoidance attachment system activates under genuine threat of loss in ways it does not activate under conditions of safety. Security produces distance. Threat produces pursuit. What the avoidant never understands is that the person who has been paying closest attention has already mapped this pattern completely, and the pursuit, read through that map, confirms rather than reverses the decision. Here is what the avoidant doesn't understand about this moment. The empath is not leaving because they stopped caring. The empath is leaving because they care too precisely. The depth of feeling that the avoidant always mistook for neediness, for sentimentality, for fragility, that depth is what produced the clarity. Every feeling the empath had about this relationship was also a piece of information. And the complete picture, assembled over time, is not something you can argue with. It is not something you can charm past. It is not something a pursuit, however genuine in its desperation, can reverse. The empath has seen the evidence. They assembled it themselves. They gave the relationship every reasonable window of time. And what they found at the end of that process is that the structure of what they were in was not capable of becoming what they needed it to be. Not because the avoidant was a bad person, but because the avoidant's architectural need to contain closeness was more constant than their desire to overcome it. If you have ever been the person in this position, the one who watched someone you genuinely understood turn toward you only when you turned away, then you know something the language around relationships often fails to capture. You know that the hardest thing about leaving someone is not the absence of feeling. The hardest thing is leaving while still feeling everything. Just leaving with full knowledge of what the other person could have been and choosing to stop waiting for the version of them that might have existed in a different internal world. That is not abandonment. That is the one form of caring that also includes yourself. And here is where the avoidance blindness reaches its deepest point. They believed throughout the relationship that the empath's emotional depth made them vulnerable. That depth of feeling was a form of dependence. That someone who could love this fully would ultimately find it difficult to let go. What they never understood, what they could not have understood without the perceptual equipment they spent their life building walls against, is that emotional depth and relational clarity are not opposites. They are the same process at scale. The empath didn't have to talk themselves into leaving. They didn't have to convince themselves the relationship wasn't worth it. They left with full recognition of its worth and full recognition that staying inside something worth grieving is not the same as staying inside something that can sustain you. What avoidants don't understand about a deep empath can be stated precisely now. They don't understand that the empath's patience was perceptual, not passive. They don't understand that the warmth they were receiving was simultaneously a process of evaluation. They don't understand that depth of feeling does not produce attachment to outcomes. It produces accuracy about them. And they don't understand that the silence, which seemed like acceptance, was the last stage before certainty. The avoidant built a strategy around the premise that emotional distance is protective, that if you don't let anyone fully in, you cannot be fully hurt. And with most people, this strategy has a version of success. The other person adjusts. The relationship calibrates to the avoidance comfort level. The ceiling becomes the floor. Everyone gets used to the thinner air up there. The empath doesn't get used to it. The empath's nervous system processes every unexplained withdrawal as information, every emotional shutdown as data, every moment of falsely calm distance as a signal about what lies beneath. And the accumulation of that data does not produce adaptation, it produces a portrait, a specific, detailed, evidence-based portrait of the relationship, of what it is, what it can become, and what it cannot. The avoidant never had access to this portrait because they were never looking. This is the deepest misunderstanding, the one that sits beneath all the others. The avoidant assumed that because they were not observing closely, neither was the empath. They projected their own perceptual style outward. They assumed the relationship was being experienced at the level they were capable of experiencing it. They didn't know they were with someone operating at a different resolution entirely, someone for whom the emotional frequency of the room was not a background detail, but the primary text. By the time the empath leaves, they have not made an impulsive decision. They have completed a process that was running from very early in the relationship, a process the avoidant was never aware of, because the empath never announced it. The empath simply watched. They simply felt. They simply noted, with patience and precision and genuine care, every moment that confirmed what they were eventually going to know. And what they came to know is this. Some people are not limited by their capacity to feel. They are limited by their willingness to be inside what they feel. The avoidant has the feeling. What they don't have is the permission to let it be true, to let it be as present, as real, as consequential as it is. And someone who lives at full resolution cannot ultimately build a life around a person who is working constantly to reduce the realness of their own experience. It is not incompatibility in the ordinary sense. It is something more specific. It is the impossibility of sustaining genuine intimacy between someone who lives at full signal and someone who has chosen just, for reasons that are real and understandable, to run their emotional life at a lower setting. The empath doesn't judge this. They understand it too completely to judge it, but understanding something fully and being able to remain inside it indefinitely are not the same thing. That distinction is the one the avoidant never makes, and not making it is precisely what costs them. Here is what remains. The avoidant who lost an empath rarely knows with precision when they lost them. They have the date of the ending. They don't have the date of the decision, because the decision didn't happen at the ending. The decision happened somewhere in the middle, in one of the quiet moments the avoidant didn't register, in one of the small walls withdrawals they never acknowledged, in one of the spaces between connection where the empath looked across and understood something they would not say. The departure was always already decided. The avoidant just didn't know to watch for it. And if there is anything worth sitting with after all of this, for the avoidant who recognizes themselves in this account, for the empath who recognizes the account in their own history, for the person who is currently somewhere in the middle of exactly this dynamic, it is this. An empath's patience is not a resource, it is a process. And the end of the process does not look like anger. It does not announce itself. it does not offer a second chance after the decision has been reached. What it looks like from the outside, simply the disappearance of someone who was, until that moment, completely present. You don't notice what that presence actually was until it is no longer there. If you recognized yourself somewhere in either position, the next video goes precisely to what comes after. What the avoidant does with the clarity that arrives too late, what the empath carries into the next relationship, what both of them take forward, and whether either of them understands with any precision what to do differently. That video follows directly from what you just watched. It is worth staying for.